What's up, everybody? This is John from Elite. Today I wanted to go over how to protect your back, and this is kind of like the guidelines that we follow to make sure that our people can still lift stuff up, can still exercise, but do so without any back pain. We have a lot of people that come in that sit for a living, and all of us sit too much anyways. All of our postures like this anyway. So there's things that we'd say, hey, common, tight or immobile areas that we need to work on. Common weak areas, if you sit a lot, your hamstrings, your butt, and your core get weak. So then picking up something can be dangerous if you're not strong enough. You get put in a bad position. And also too, back pain is not something that you want to have. It's very upsetting, just like say a shoulder's pain would be, but the back would limit most of what you can do in your day-to-day, and we want to make sure that you can still go to work. So if you come in and exercise, we don't want to make anything worse or potentially hurt it through exercise. So what we do, kind of like a checklist of how we would break things up and how we would say, hey, here's things that we would focus on. So we're going to limit flexion extension under load. Now, flexion is like doing a crunch, and then extension, okay, extending back. We don't want to do that while we're loaded. So say if there's a bar on your back, or say you're picking stuff off the ground, we don't want to arch our back and then pick up, or we don't want to come up and then round our back over. We want to stay in a nice neutral, okay, when we're loaded, we want to stay in a neutral position, and then you want to be core tight and braced while we do that movement. We don't want flexion extension happening in our spine while there is weight, but we do want to train flexion extension. So with our core movements, we do want to flex, we do want to extend, we want to hold an isometric. So think of like a plank, you're holding that position, okay, and you're not moving. And then an anti-rotation, so say I'm grabbing a band and I pull it here and the band's pulling me, but I'm resisting with my stomach. We want to train all those things. We just don't want to do them loaded, or, I'd like to think of loaded as, say, one of the big lifts, or you're picking up something off the ground, or if you're squatting, anything that's going to create spinal compression, or if you're bending over and say rowing and you have that shear loading of it wanting to pull that way and you have to resist, okay? Keeping your low back stable and your thoracic spine mobile. So our low back, we want to have some movement in it, but we don't want to be we don't want to get a lot of movement out of our lower back. We want to increase our movement with our thoracic spine. So say if we were sitting down, we'd want to be able to open up all the way, keeping our hips in line and then back, okay? And like I said earlier, we're like this, so we want to get into a better position, being able to go chest up, stomach tight, okay, instead of rounding forward, because if we were to pick up something, okay, say we're going to go and grab a barbell, okay, my shoulders are rounded forward. When it starts getting heavy, at lighter weights you can do it, but when it starts getting heavy, if your shoulder blades are apart, okay, and you can't get your shoulder blades back and pinched, what's going to happen is as you start coming up, your upper back's going to round, which is then going to make your low back round, go into flexion, and then you can hurt your back. So we want to be able to be mobile enough to where we can go chest back, okay, and we can load it, lock in, and then be able to push through the ground. Or if we're squatting, we don't want to have such bad posture, our elbows kind of come up and you're leaning forward like this, because that, again, is going to make you round. If your upper back rounds, that's going to make your lower back round. So what we do is we'd say, hey, we want to increase your thoracic spine mobility, and because that's going to prevent low back recruitment. That's what I was saying before, where if we're here like this, okay, that's going to prevent us from calling upon our low back for help. And we don't pair deadlift or squat pattern movements with flexion or extension. I like to pair core movements if we pair it with a core movement, okay, or even in that entire workout, I'd like to stay away from flexion or extension direct training, okay, when I'm doing, say, a deadlift day. I would train more the isometric and the anti-rotation, because it's going to train that neutral position, and it's going to get in my brain of that's what I'm focusing on. And also, I don't want to do a ton of flexion, and then go try to pick up something and expect me to not go into flexion. So that's what we would focus on to keep your low back stable, thoracic spine mobile, and then it comes down to exercise selection and then programming. So based off of what the person is able to, say someone is mobility-wise, they can do whatever, they can do every single exercise, they're not limited in any fashion, or strength-wise, they're not limited. You have a lot more options of what you can do. So say that person, I would say, hey, you could do, you know, say every 3 to 4 weeks, we'll change the movement pattern. So we'll say, hey, let's do a kettlebell deadlift where the weight is kind of underneath you. Okay, we're gonna pick up, we're gonna maybe go higher reps with that because it's not as much of a load and also not as much of a spinal compression, okay, as compared to say a barbell deadlift. Then after 4 weeks, we change it to say heavy barbell RDLs where the weight is in front of you. You're gonna be leaning forward, but if you practice that and get into good positions and we focus on that for 4 weeks, switch it up. Okay, now we're gonna go to more of a trap bar deadlift. You're gonna be more upright. You're gonna have a lot more spinal load, and you can go heavier with that, but we're not gonna do, say, maybe as much of it, okay? And also, we're only doing 4 weeks of it, so if we go kind of, I like to think of alternating, hey, a lot of spinal load, okay, the next 4 weeks, not a lot of spinal load. You kind of go back and forth. Because that's, if we just go spinal load, and then just load up and say we're gonna do deadlifts, say with a straight bar all year, or the majority of the year, okay, unless you're training for a specific sport, you know, say powerlifting, you're just gonna beat up your low back. You're just gonna create, if you have any issues, you're just gonna magnify those issues. So we try to change those to be smart with your training, so you're still training your deadlift pattern, but you're not getting beat up. Kind of the same thing with barbell bench pressing. If you just do barbell bench presses all year, your shoulders are gonna start bothering you. There's gonna be problems that are gonna arise. So you have to say, okay, I'm gonna switch and go to an incline. I'm gonna switch and go to dumbbells. I'm gonna do a loaded push-up. You can change it so that every 4 weeks, so it's not always the same thing and you're not getting beat up. And that's gonna give you long-term results and longevity health-wise so that you don't get beat up and can still train. Now, we like to prefer the trap bar, which is the one where you stand in, the weight is, there's like a circle and you have handles on the side. You can squat / deadlift this, so you're not as much bent over and you're not leaning forward versus the barbell, which the weight is in front of you. And when you pick up, you have to, one, have more mobility is required to do this. And a lot of people don't have that mobility. And they also there's a lot of requirements of like, hey, you need to have a pretty strong low back. You need to have a pretty strong core. Okay, you need to be able to come down and get those shoulders back into that position. And then you have to lean back and then drive through and kind of lean back. Because the weight's in front of you, it's gonna want you to lean forward. The more you lean forward, the more it goes on your low back. So, not that the barbell deadlift is bad, just for the general public, if we do it very limited throughout the year, maybe once or twice a year where we load up and do that. And to be honest, I like to do it with the bands up top. Bands go to the top of the rack, it comes down to the bar, so it helps you out of the bottom, which is the hardest, which would bother someone's low back the most. So for the general public, of people just trying to get stronger, feel better, I would say go to the trap bar deadlift more often than the barbell deadlift. The trap bar deadlift, you're in the middle of the weight. So what you can do is you can kind of squat down. You can still push through the ground. It's a lot more athletic. It's easier to teach. And people can do it more often without getting beat up. Also, too, we changed along with the exercise selection programming, we also changed the height that we do things at. So when we tell people, we're like, hey, go heavy as you can. We want you to really push it. We'll elevate the bars up so they're a little bit higher. So instead of coming from the ground, they might come from right here, so it's a much less of their low back, and they can come up and then back down to maybe straps or boxes, whatever it may be, however you load up the weight on top. But again, that's another way that we can take stress off of your low back, keep you healthy, you're still lifting heavy, you're still getting the stimulus that we're looking to achieve, you know, instead of being like, oh, hey, I only use a barbell because that's like what you're supposed to do. It really comes down to like, well, where's the person at? And the general public, if you're just trying to get stronger, feel better, all of these things, you know, coming into play, saying like, all right, well, say you sit for a living. All right, well, one, we don't want you to try doing flexion extension under load. Okay, you want to increase your thoracic spine mobility, keep your low back stable, and then also every 4 weeks changing the movement pattern, but also coaching them on that, teaching them how to brace, and then doing the weight that's according to them, maybe changing sets and reps so that you're not getting like, you know, if you're trying to do 15 reps of a trap bar deadlift maximum weight, yes, you're going to beat up your low back. So we want to stay away from those. So pretty much that's kind of how we would go about protecting your back and making sure that you can still lift heavy, still have results long term, and then also not get hurt. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out.